Everybody, this is Perch. We people talk about the quality of comics decreasing, but what about just the quality of fiction in general? So that's a question I have here, and I think it's a good one. It's a good one to think about because I do think there's just general changes that have been made to media and kind of how it's consumed and what gets done and everything else. So let's get into that. It says, Dear Perch, in your video Comics and Longevity, you pointed out how the number of good writers and good stories today is very few and far between for comics. I was wondering if the same can be said for about fiction, entertainment in general, where the quality for the vast majority of shows, comics, games, etc., is not as good anymore or mediocre at best. I know some people who would say that, you know, anyway, I'll get to it. I've got a. It says I know some people who would say, but look at manga or anime, etc. But that as well isn't as good or tends to be recycled and bland. For example, the Isaki genre, rom-coms, most of the shonen, some of the seinen are mostly bland. I'm kind of stuffed nose, and I'm butchering all this stuff by accident this time, not on purpose. Anyway, I have a lot of good stories with good characterization, in my opinion, are usually carried by pretty colors and animation. I was wondering if there will be a crash for video games, anime, comics, etc., similar to the video games crash of the late 90s, yeah, that will spawn a new age of entertainment fiction that might bring new and well-written stories to the table, if you think similarly. So first of all, yes, I do think it's across the board. What kind of I chuckled about is that there's a South Park episode where, they kind of did this bit where, growing up, you just start to get cynical about everything, and everything starts to kind of feel like it sucks. And the effect is when you're younger and you start to consume this stuff for the first time, there's a lot of newness, a lot of excitement, a lot of things you haven't seen before. And so even something that's not really well done, the novelty of it still makes you happy. That's kind of the classic tie into nostalgia. For a lot of us, I mean, early science fiction movies that you might have seen, depending when you were younger, whenever that was, probably had made more of an impact. Probably you enjoyed them more because you were young, you were seeing a movie, there was explosions, you hadn't seen that before. Another classic one is horror. A lot of people think very fondly of some of the first horror movies that they ever watched because it genuinely scared them. They hadn't seen stuff like that before. It was new and different. And what you see is that when you go back and you watch it years and years later, you have one of two reactions. Either there's that nostalgia play of like, oh wow, this is cool. I have all these memories from that, and you feel kind of cool about it. Or, and these two aren't mutually exclusive, you you're like, holy shit, this is terrible, and you just realize that some of those movies are awful. Some of the Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street, in particular. I'm sorry, and I know it's heresy because those movies are fun and everything else, but holy smokes, they're not great movies. I'm just throwing that out there. The effects are pretty poor. You watch them later, like, wow, why did I like this? Well, the answer is because you were younger and that stuff worked. I think that's true with comic books and books and everything, where some of the stuff you read early on in your time, you really enjoyed, and you come back and you read it later, it's like, this is not very good. There's a lot of people who are very nostalgic about the 90s. Well, there were some good comics in the 90s, but there's a lot of crap there too. But we tend to forget a little bit about the crap, both because, we were just getting to comics, so it appeared nicer. And this is true with a lot of the Image books. Quite frankly, a lot of them looked really pretty. But if you go back and you read some of those stories, like, you would not, you wouldn't give Bendis or King or Taylor a pass for some of this stuff. Like, it's not good. And, but it's okay because that's kind of how things have evolved. It's more simplistic. It's not fair to compare because I think some of the problems in comics today, as you identify in your mail, are different. They're different problems. They're different reasons why some of this work doesn't work. But I do think that there's this case, and with comics in particular, and books, I think there's this need to strike quickly and make money, and as a result, you're not given a lot of time to create breathing room in your story or in your book, or even frankly your movie or your streaming series. So it's changed the way storytelling is going on. You have to kind of strike fast, catch people, try and suck them in to, get to the next gig where you're hopefully going to get a renewal or another book, another whatever it happens to be. And you forego a lot of, classic storytelling or, plot build or other things. You get rid of you ignore it because you don't have time for it. You're not gonna make it to that second book if you can't do some gimmicks. And I also think that there's this thing that goes on in all media, and it's kind of this, and I think we're really in the middle of it now. And I do think it's what led to a lot of the crash in the 90s. One of the things that happened in the 90s is a lot of video games, a lot of books, a lot of comics, they started to do the same thing. It was kind of the same plot, it was the same team, the same, in some cases with comics, the same art style. And it just was the same thing over and over. And it's like the businesses get very, uncreative, where they go, we can't take risks on new concepts. So just do what works and just kind of regurgitate that 800 times. And that's what you see. You see a lot of just the same thing over and over, kind of, just being repeated, because people don't want to take the risk of trying something new and failing. So they just do the same stuff. And that builds and builds and builds until eventually kind of the bottom drops out from under it. People, stop getting hooked by the same stuff over and over. And then people are kind of forced to do things that are new because the business is falling. That's what happened to video games. What happened to comics in the 90s. And I think we're right about at that point now. I think that, the interesting side effect is that there are easier channels. There's easier ways to get your hands on the indies. Your point is correct on manga. And I mean, I hate to say it because I know that's the shining jewel for a lot of people, but a lot of manga right now is extremely repetitive. People mention the same 5, 10 series over and over and over for a reason. They're good, but there's 90 more behind it. And a lot of those 90 are extremely uncreative. The art is at times poor, and it's just, it's the same stuff. I mean, and so I think that we're in this period where, it can't sustain where we are right now. So eventually, yes, the bottom does drop out of it to some extent. We have a crash, and then people kind of rally around and they start putting out new stories again. And I think COVID probably, artificially delayed this by a couple of years. I think we're there. We're at that moment where this is I think even right now, if you're really doing a close analysis of money and where people's attention are going, I think that we're in that period right now for comics and also books. And I think video games is probably very similar. Video games gets propped up a little bit with exclusives and some of what the AAA studios are doing, and it's slightly different. But we haven't had a burst of creativity for a while, and we're overdue for one. So I look forward to the washout and rebirth of a lot of these entertainment businesses, and I think it'll be very healthy when it does hit. But that's my opinion of it. I wouldn't explain this as comics are going to completely implode and everything is going to die. It's not, because these brands are built up, but the storytelling, the methods, and some of the stars that are coming out of it. I mean, we haven't had a mega star in comics for a while. And when I say a mega star, like Bendis, for all the hate he gets, was somebody who got a massive name in comics. Mark Millar, massive name. The closest we have right now is Tom Taylor, probably. I mean, that in terms of trying to be at that, and it's nowhere close to the same. And I'm not talking about quality. I'm talking about hype. I think that we're overdue for a breakout star. You just don't have that right now. And I'm curious where that's going to come from as well. But anyway, good question. I'm curious what people think in the comments below. Let me know if you agree, disagree, thoroughly hate it. It's all up to you. And thanks for listening.